I'm here with Alec Barrett Wilsdon. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
Thanks, of Sourcestack. So you have an interesting company. I found out about you because we are clients of yours, actually. But Sourcestack, you guys are, I guess, data wranglers would be one way to put it. And it's interesting because now if you look at LinkedIn, or if you look at the business media, you see all the buzz about AI and generative AI and all these different things, but you can't do anything without data, right? You need real data. I mean, I guess generative AI can make up data that it seems to be doing sometimes. But we came across you because you actually have a company, Sourcestack, and you have a very not just effective, but it's also very cost effective way that you're able to gather and to aggregate data and then feed it to your customers. And from what I know so far, you have customers that might be in the employment sector. Obviously, at our own company, we just launched Empleo Bilingüe, which is the only employment platform focused on bilingual talent. And you're able to provide quality data, very high quality data internationally. The data is obviously there for places like the US, for Canada, I'm sure other jurisdictions as well. And one surprising thing, one thing that I found out is that you have very high quality data for other countries like Latin America, like the Caribbean. But aside from job data, you also have commercial data. You're able to pull in information. I'm not as familiar with that side of the business, so maybe give me an idea of the use case and the business model for Sourcestack across the board.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a brief overview of what we do. So we're a data brokerage. We find data and we help people get the kind of data that they're looking for. These days, we have a few different data products that play somewhat nicely with each other. As you mentioned, we have hiring data. It's approaching about 5 million currently active job posts. So for folks who are looking to find companies that are hiring for a certain type of role, or in some cases, we help people with their job hunt. We can be helpful because we have all of this currently active data, which, as you imagine, becomes useless pretty quickly when those jobs start to close. So there's a fair amount of work, to your point, and kind of continuing to wrangle it as time goes on. But our original product was a company's data set. So for folks who wanted to find companies using Salesforce on the East Coast, that was the original idea. That's where the name Sourcestack comes from, is to source the technology stack of a given company. These days, since we have different products, the name doesn't make quite as much sense, but it's still fun to say it in person and have people say, I'm not sure I got that correctly. The alliteration is a bit confusing. But our company's data set covers about 16 million companies now. We're looking at things like what kind of company are they, what tech products do they use, how many employees do they have, things like this that tend to be helpful for companies, maybe like agencies, for example, that are trying to find more clients to do Facebook ads or copywriting or brand design for. About 2.5 years ago, we launched an e-commerce catalog product. So stores could say, hey, I have X, Y, and Z products currently. I'm looking to add a couple more. What's currently successful? What are my competitors selling? And you can go as far as to say, hey, connect me with the vendor that they're using in Vietnam that's actually supplying those products.
Oh, wow.
So for folks who have an e-commerce business or who have clients who work in e-commerce, we see this with agencies quite a bit as well. We can be quite helpful there as well. But I would say the genesis of the business was just being a customer of my now competitors and saying, hey, this is a pretty frustrating experience. A lot of businesses need a pretty substantial amount of data to operate, and there's things that you can't generate easily internally. So that's where we try to be helpful.
One of the things that I've learned, I've become very shy when people approach our company and their data brokers for two reasons. One, I'm worried about the ethics of how they've compiled the data. But then number two, years ago, I actually took the bait. And when people contacted us with different mailing lists and things like that, I made the mistake of responding. And what they do is, even if you're not interested in what they have, is they hound you forever, and then they become business versions of stalkers, and they're always contacting you. And I say, I'm not interested, I don't want anything ever. And now they put you on their list, and they're selling your name to other companies. And one of the things I found, that's not the case when companies deal with you. You also have a very innovative kind of pricing model. A lot of companies want you to sign either a big contract. Before I came across you, we were looking at a company that did almost exactly what you did, but not nearly as well, to be honest, because they had very limited geographic reach, but they only would dispense the data if you signed a pretty big contract. And I said, we just don't need that. I'm sure you guys are nice people. We just don't need that. And you have a model that can work for very small businesses, I would imagine even individuals or researchers, somebody in academia, but then also very large businesses. And why did you come up with that model that you have? It's very accessible. I'm afraid that you're going to go and change it. So if you do, grandfather us in. But that's really it makes the service and the output very affordable for businesses of all sizes.
Yeah, you made a good point about kind of being hounded by folks and sort of old school data brokerage space. There's definitely a breed of business that very much lives and dies by, hey, we can send 100,000 emails a day, and if 0.1% of them open it, that's still money. Interestingly, a large majority of our customers these days are affiliates and referrals. So we have to stand on people like the product and they're willing to tell people about it for that to continue to be important for us. But to your point on sort of the ethics of it, we made a pretty clear decision early on not to involve ourselves in the sort of person data business that tends to be adjacent to the company data business that we run. So we aren't saying, hey, here's the VP of X, Y, and Z at this company, go crazy. We're just trying to help people find the companies that are relevant to their business. And that has made us, it's at times, unpopular. I occasionally have to get on a call with somebody and say, hey, I don't think we can support what you need. But it's important to draw those lines and be comfortable with them. To your point on pricing, pricing was a big part of my frustration with competitors. You can see people who do all of these kind of strange structures to try to get value out of these different contracts. One of the ones you see most commonly is people just sharing passwords. So somebody buys an account for unlimited data, and then 10 of their friends pitch in a tenth of the cost, and they all download what they need, and then they cancel before the next month. And who's really happy in that arrangement? The provider's not. The people downloading the data are not. And 6 months from now, they have to do the whole thing again because all the data they have is now outdated. So we try to think about it from the way that people would want to use the data. We charge based on usage. If you're using a lot of data, you pay accordingly. And if you're not, you have all the time in the world to do so. We don't feel that there should be arbitrary constraints trying to push people for the sake of a few extra dollars here and there. And the business is more than 3 years old now. The pricing model has not changed. We've raised prices, but beyond that, it's exactly the same as when we started. And I'm happy about that. I expect that to continue.
Great. So let's talk about different use cases and when a potential customer would want to contact Sourcestack. So the one that was obvious for me, how we found out about you, actually, Chris Russell is also a publisher, and he's an expert in the job board business. And you were on an interview with him. I follow him, and that's how I found out about you originally. But so in that case, you obviously have data in terms of things like job postings, in terms of what companies are hiring for what positions, and that information is constantly changing, and you're able to aggregate that information and then package it, whether somebody needs that in an XML feed, whether they need that in a spreadsheet or some kind of file, or something like that. But the other use cases, so maybe if I'm a company and I want to find not individuals who I can spam or who I can, pester to death, but I want to find out the companies in my market, right? I want to find out, as we're publishers, as we publish Finance Columbia, and we get calls sometimes from people seeking to source vendors. Now, we're not consultants. That's not really our expertise. We might make it and you say, hey, try to call these people or call this agency that handles that. But maybe if I'm trying to find out who are the leather manufacturers in Bogota, or the hospitality sector or insurance sector in Costa Rica, I would imagine, or obviously, Milwaukee or Toronto, then your platform seems like it would be an obvious choice for that with good high quality data. But what are some other use cases that maybe are less obvious that you've seen, maybe some really cool cases where you've been able to help people looking for information maybe that wouldn't traditionally go to a traditional data broker or aggregator?
Yeah, so there's one that comes immediately to mind. So we work with a fair number of folks who operate around the e-commerce industry. So people who sell products to stores, people who sell services like copywriting. And since we have this broad catalog data, we can be useful to them in some sort of creative ways. When we first started offering the product, the idea was to help stores expand their own catalogs by seeing what was on the market and what was doing well. But what we learned was, when you're running an agency that helps stores, you really need to understand what they're selling in order to be helpful to them. If your specialty is, hey, we work with skincare e-commerce businesses, you probably don't want to call up a barbecue company and say, hey, we can help you sell your product, because it might be a little outside of your familiarity, and the types of things that you've done in the past may not translate very well. So one of the data points that we can gather with catalog data is the relative sales ranking of different products. So you can say, this is their number 1 product, this is their number 10 product. These are the things that are making them the most money. And so, if you're running an agency and hey, we can take really high selling products to the next level with TikTok ads, something I've seen increasingly frequently. Then when you get on the phone with the owner of a store, you can say, hey, I've noticed that this product right here is not selling very well, and I thought that it would be. Here's some thoughts on why that might be and how we can take it there. That type of conversation is immediately different than just saying, hey, I bought a list that had your name on it. Do you want our services? There are people who are receptive to that too, but that phone call is a lot more difficult. We like to give people the tools to be, as useful as they can be. And by extension, we try to be as useful as we can be. But ultimately, all of our most interesting use cases are things that our customers have done. I just find out about it afterwards and say, hey, I would never have thought you could do that. But I'm happy to see it.
It's a really cool platform. I'll tell you one of the dangers, not for you, but for users, is you get in there and you're working on, like in our case, we're getting our Empleo Bilingüe set up and things like that. But then you think about it's like Legos or Tinker Toys. You think about all the cool things you can do, and then you start doing them and you're just playing around with it and you forget, wait a minute, it's pay as you go, which is a good thing. But it's almost fun. You can fool around all day looking at things like that and forget about that. And so I think that it's really easy to use. That's another thing. It is I'm not a technical person, but it's very straightforward. The support has been responsive, even though I know it's still a small company in terms of manpower, but the response has always been superior. So that's great. There's not a lot to it. There's not a lot of moving. And when I say that, I mean there's not a lot of moving parts. It's not something that you've got to go and take a course to learn. Even if you're not a programmer, if you can use Excel, then you're way more than qualified, I would say, to use this. And so that's one of the cool things about it. Let me ask you this. Is there anything that you wanted to mention about the platform, or any use cases or anything that I neglected to ask you or mention that you wanted to be sure that we touched on?
I would say that something that comes up somewhat frequently is people who are looking for usage of categories of tech products. So if somebody's saying, hey, I built a new CRM system for salespeople, and I know that I want to talk to customers of CRMs, something that we've begun to be quite useful for is say, hey, let's find every CRM product and all of their users, rather than, hey, I want people who use Salesforce. And this allows you to get a pretty broad reach and to test, maybe the most competitive matchup is not against the one that you thought, it was against some, CRM 23 that has been around for a long time, but still has a pretty big user base. But like I said before, I think the most interesting use cases are the ones that the customers tell me about. I could sit here all day and think about them, but I would certainly not have the most interesting ones. But if folks have an interest in data broadly for their business and they're not quite sure what that looks like, I'm happy to have a conversation with them and say, hey, maybe we can be helpful. Here's what that could look like. And then the worst thing that I can say is, I don't think that we can support this, but perhaps here's another vendor that might be useful for that. I somewhat frequently recommend our competitors, which perhaps I should not be, but it's a small industry, and ultimately there are certain types of data that other people are better for. We need to be respectful of that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is to be helpful. And when people know you're honest, and when you say, hey, you know what, I don't have what you need, but try this over here, then that just builds trust. And then people know to come back to you when they need what you have, and also to send people your way. The website is Sourcestack, source like, SOURCE, stack like STACK .co, not .com, .co, right? If somebody wants to try it out, I mean, the prices are cheap enough to just go ahead and get started. But if somebody wants to really kind of get their head around it, I would imagine they would contact you or your team, or what would be the next steps for somebody who maybe isn't even sure that this can work for them, but maybe wants to look into it and see if it can work for them.
Yeah, I mean, the standard way is, we have a input on the homepage where you can put in your email and someone on staff will get back to you shortly. I would say for folks who are listening to this in particular, feel free just to send me an email directly. It's alec@sourcestack.co. Say, hey, I heard about you. I like the interview. Or maybe you say, hey, I didn't like the interview, but I still want to buy some data. Feel free to do so. And I'm happy to craft something that's specific to your use case. Ultimately, this is a product that has a lot of different ways it can be configured. So we try to be helpful up front in thinking about what that can look like. So if you think, hey, we have a need for some type of data around companies, maybe they can help, just send me an email. We'll see if we can.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Alec. It's great to speak to you again. You're doing great things. Keep at it. I'm excited about seeing you grow. And I'm sure that we'll be in touch, because I'm glad to admit that we're already a customer of yours, and it just works. It works. It's efficient. And just as importantly, the model is ethical. And so keep up the good work and stay safe in your travels.
Likewise. Good speaking to you as always, Lauren.
Okay. Take care.
Cheers.